The future of one of Hollywood's oldest movie studios is currently the subject of a multi-billion-dollar bun fight, which could shape the future of entertainment and potentially politics. On Friday, Warner Bros. Discovery announced it had agreed a sale to streaming giant Netflix, who would pay shareholders $83 billion for the acquisition. However, earlier today, Paramount Pictures has now offered $108 billion in a hostile bid, appealing directly to shareholders, so bypassing the current managers of Warner Bros. Warner Brothers is, of course, most famous as a century-old Hollywood production company. They created the Looney Tunes franchise, and more recently, Harry Potter and Superman. Warner Bros. Discovery also owns TV giant HBO, which produces prestige shows such as The Sopranos and White Lotus, and the news network CNN. Now, either of these purchases, so not entirely confirmed which one will happen, be it Netflix or Paramount, either of them could be worrying for different reasons. One for the future of entertainment, and the other for the future of politics. Bit of a rock and a hard place situation here. We'll start with the Netflix deal, which was announced last Thursday. This is the deal that, due to market concentration, people think would be a disaster for the film and TV industry. In the New York Times on Saturday, Roy Price, who is the chief executive of an entertainment studio and was previously the head of Amazon Studios, said the deal could be the end of Hollywood. He pointed out that Netflix spends $18 billion a year on commissioning, and Warner Brothers spend $20 billion. Now, combined, that would make up 20% of all spending on the film and TV industry, which includes sports rights. So it will be a much bigger proportion of actual films and actual TV. And that would mean that much of the investment that goes into TV and film is concentrated in one place. And that would mean that diversity and cultural output would take a big hit, because instead of having two different funders you can play off each other, you just go into one person, one company. So this producer wrote this: having fewer bidders generally means that fewer shows get made. Fewer visions means a narrower range of storytelling. Consolidation aligns decision-making around one organisation or one individual's point of view. If the merger proceeds, the feature film development ecosystem, already imperiled, will be further constrained, leading to fewer and less interesting movies. And will this new entity nurture the kind of risky sensibility that brought us premium television like The Sopranos and The White Lotus? So in America, all these shows are on HBO Max. Here, they're on Now TV or Sky Atlantic, depending on which one you have, if you have either. What the merger would mean for films on theatrical release, so i.e. those which are in the cinema, could be even worse than for sort of interesting series. Before Netflix's deal to buy Warner was announced, James Cameron, who you'll know as the director of Terminator, Alien, Avatar, Titanic, all sorts of other Oscar-winning films, said this to the Town podcast about what Netflix buying Warner would mean.
Oh, Netflix would be a disaster. Sorry, so? Ted, but geez, Sarandos has gone on record saying theatrical films are dead.
Outmoded, yeah.
No, theatrical is dead, quote unquote. Theatrical is dead.
I don't know if he said that, but he said that it's an outmoded experience.
It's a quote.
For most.
It's a quote, at least to the extent that you can verify anything.
But now he's promising theaters if they buy Warner Brothers.
I know, but it's
he doesn't believe that.
It's sucker bait.
Yes.
Right? It's sucker bait. And we'll put the movie out for a week. We'll put it out for 10 days. We'll qualify for Academy Awards consideration. See, I think that's fundamentally rotten at the core.
So that was James Cameron talking about Ted Sarandos, the CEO of Netflix. And I'm going to show you a quote from Sarandos that I'd seen circulated this weekend. It's from 2024 in an interview with the New York Times. So he said, Barbie and Oppenheimer would be great for Netflix. They definitely would have enjoyed just as big an audience on Netflix. And so I don't think there's any reason to believe that certain kinds of movies do or don't work. There's no reason to believe that the movie itself is better in any size of screen for all people. My son's an editor. He is 28 years old, and he watched Lawrence of Arabia on his phone. Now, Lawrence of Arabia, sort of a real classic movie of the 20th century, also has these beautiful sort of expansive panoramic scenes of the desert, sort of camels sort of going over sand dunes and stuff. The idea of spending, I think it's also about 3 hours long. Like, I don't know how someone is watching a 3-hour film on their phone. Strikes me as depressing. I'm not sure I want this guy in charge of cultural output in the United States, but there we are. The Writers Guild of America, also unhappy with this particular bid. So they're obviously one of the main unions in Hollywood. This was their statement when it came to the Netflix offer. So they said, the world's largest streaming company swallowing one of its biggest competitors is what antitrust laws were designed to prevent. The outcome would eliminate jobs, push down wages, worsen conditions for all entertainment workers, raise prices for consumers, and reduce the volume and diversity of content for all viewers. Industry workers, along with the public, are already impacted by only a few powerful companies maintaining tight control over what consumers can watch on television, on streaming, and in theatres. This merger must be blocked. So that was the Netflix bid. Doesn't sound good to me. Sounds like a bad idea. I hope it doesn't happen. Let's now look at Paramount's hostile takeover bid. Now, this counts as a hostile takeover bid because it doesn't have the approval of the current managers of Warner Brothers. Instead, they've gone straight to the shareholders. So how this works is that the managers of Warner Brothers invited people to make various bids. They agreed with the Netflix bid. So the CEO of Warner wants to sell to Netflix, but now Paramount is saying, we're going to go directly to the shareholders and say, look, you shareholders, you need to outvote the current CEO and let us buy the company because then you'll make more money. That's what's going on here. Of course, as you'll know, Paramount is another streamer and film production company. It made movies like Mission Impossible, Top Gun. It owns CBS, which is a news platform. I think it might also show other things, I'm not sure. Also Nickelodeon, MTV, Comedy Central, lots of content that I'm sure you'll have watched. Again, just like with Netflix, this would concentrate the market for cultural production, though not to quite such an extreme degree. In fact, the bigger deal with Paramount is politics. So Paramount was bought earlier this year by David Ellison, the son of Larry Ellison. You can see David there on the right, Larry on the left. And that picture's from about 20 years ago. There don't seem to be many recent pictures of them together for some reason, although they are very close. Larry Ellison is the owner of tech firm Oracle. He was briefly the world's richest man earlier this year, and that was after a deal between Oracle and OpenAI. He is a key ally of Donald Trump. He's sort of hosted fundraisers for the president. He's also a very, very keen Zionist. In 2017, he donated $17 million to the IDF, or Israeli Occupation Force, which is more accurately described as. And he said this to Israeli TV in 2014.
The renewal of the Jewish state is something that I think touches all of us. For 2,000 years, we were a stateless people. And now we have a country of our own, defended by all the brave men and women of the IDF. So anything we can do to support them, who devote their lives for preserving the state of Israel, keeping the people safe, and allowing our state to continue sometimes in very, very difficult situations.
Now, in case you're wondering whether Ellison is one of those liberal Zionists we're often told about, he's an ally of the current leadership of the country. In 2021, Netanyahu holidayed on Ellison's own private island. The Ellisons have also had no gripes about using their media acquisitions for political ends. When they bought Paramount, the news channel CBS, as I've said, was included in the deal. And David Ellison, so that's the son who's been put in charge of it, his first move at the channel was to employ pro-Israel, anti-woke commentator Bari Weiss as its editor-in-chief. Buying Warner would mean they could bring that same approach to CNN, presumably. And from his interview with Bloomberg today, sort of after announcing this counter-offer, or this hostile takeover bid, David Ellison made it clear that newsmaking is a big part of his motivation.
CNN, I assume you would combine the news gathering operation with CBS's if, in fact, you did own that asset?
Yeah, so look, we've been really clear since by the last time we were here what we want to do with news,
yes,
which is we want to build a scaled news service that is basically fundamentally in the trust business, that is in the truth business, and that speaks to the 70% of Americans that are in the middle. And we believe that by doing so, that is, for us, kind of doing well while doing good. And we believe in that business model, and we believe it's essential.
And do you think the president embraces the idea of you being the owner of CNN, given his criticism, obviously, for that network in the past?
By the way, we've had great conversations with the president about this, but I think but I don't want to speak for him in any way, shape, or form.
Now, you've had great conversations with the president. Do you really think that he's convinced that you're going to make this into a trust business and a truth business? Not that I think that is their motivation. Anyway, the relationship of the Ellisons to Donald Trump had long been seen as something that could help lubricate any potential purchase of Warner by Paramount. Larry Ellison is a personal friend of Donald Trump. He's, as I say, he's hosted fundraisers for his election campaigns. And the Paramount counteroffer for Warner Brothers puts these comments from Donald Trump last night about the Netflix takeover bid in a slightly different light.
Should they be allowed to buy Warner Brothers? Should Netflix?
Well, that's the question. They have a very big market share. And when they have Warner Brothers, that share goes up a lot. So I don't know. That's going to be for some economists to tell. And also, and I'll be involved in that decision too. They have a very big market share.
So there was a brief moment where people thought maybe Donald Trump is a principled antitrust guy. He really doesn't want monopolies, so he wants to keep this big company and this big company from merging. Or maybe he just knew that the Ellisons were going to put in a hostile bid later in the day and he's better friends with them. We've also learned, if you think this already looks a bit cozy, we've also learned today that the Trump family is deeply involved in the bid from the Ellisons and from Paramount. So Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, an unofficial Middle East envoy, also envoy to the Russians, it seems, is, in fact, one of the financial backers of Paramount's Warner Brothers bid. Also, lots of sovereign wealth funds from the Arab states. I think the Saudis, potentially the Qataris, Jared Kushner and Larry Ellison all want to buy together. They've all clubbed together to buy Warner Brothers and CNN. Barry, neither of these look great. So you've got a merger with Netflix, which I think would be incredibly damaging to sort of plurality in the entertainment industry, or a merger with Paramount, which again would be sort of damaging for plurality when it comes to what kind of dramas get made, for example. Not necessarily as disastrous as Netflix, but with this much sharper political concern. Which of these would you take? Are you sacrificing entertainment or politics?
I would take neither of them. It's this whole thing is so depressing. I saw somebody saying on Twitter recently, "Oh, it's awesome to live in a world that's controlled by like 5 guys." I just honestly think that that's where we're going. To talk about cultural output for a moment without coming off like a complete snob. This is the enshittification of culture. If Netflix end up buying Warner Brothers, yes, I think James Cameron is right. They don't want us going to the theaters. They put things in the theaters to qualify for awards. And I've never heard anything more absurd than watching Lawrence of Arabia on your phone. I mean, not to come off all Christopher Nolan about this, but Jesus, do not watch Lawrence of Arabia on your phone. We all know that when we go to Netflix, we get served up a homepage and people are, too lazy to dig down and find anything worthwhile. Quite a lot of the time on that homepage is slop. And they are incentivized to make lowest common denominator stuff. Martin Scorsese was slammed a few years ago for saying that Marvel films weren't cinema, that they were theme park experiences. I'm not saying that we shouldn't make Marvel movies, but I think he's right. And so you look back to like the 70s and you think if Netflix owned Warner Brothers and we keep consolidating, would the conversation be made? Would Badlands be made? Would Chinatown be made? Probably not. So look, it's crappy for culture. But the most important thing is the political aspect, the possibility that Paramount will buy it. Antitrust laws in the US, as far as I understand, can be quite difficult to enforce, can be quite patchy, and can be quite politicized. Also, I heard somebody who was a former head of the Federal Trade Commission say today that a president being involved in a decision like this would be completely unprecedented. This is not an executive function. This is supposed to be a technical analysis to figure out whether or not this is a monopoly too far. And I think it's blatantly obvious that Trump sounded a note of caution about Netflix because he favors the Paramount bid. I think the Ellisons are incredibly dangerous operators when it comes to the US media landscape, when it comes to the US news landscape. And I have never seen a news network or a media entity destroyed as quickly as CBS News has been destroyed since Barry Weiss was made the editor-in-chief. And look, CBS News is an incredibly storied, incredibly well-respected US news source. And within 2 weeks of Barry Weiss taking over that network at the behest of the Ellisons, I went to their website and all I read was pure pro-Israel propaganda and increasingly pro-Trump propaganda. I never thought it was possible to dismantle a news network that fast. So, yes, I do not want culture destroyed, but the Ellisons are very, very dangerous people. And Trump getting involved in this is just massive executive overreach, notwithstanding the fact that his own family is involved. This is insane levels of corruption.
You've said neither. I mean, it should really be neither. It shouldn't be the case that either of these get approved because this is market concentration, whichever one buys the other, or whichever one sort of gets to buy Warner Brothers, let's say. It's market concentration, which will increase the monopoly power of either Paramount or Warner, depending, or Netflix, sorry, depending on who gets it. And Matt Stoller, who is a sort of very vocal anti-monopoly campaigner and writer, very popular Substacker, said neither Paramount nor Netflix can legally buy Warner. Warner's slate of movies this year is doing well. It's the #1 studio at the box office. It can easily remain independent. It's a profitable, great business. He's saying, according to American law, this shouldn't be legal. Of course, obviously, politics might get in the way of that. Interesting as well, he's saying it should remain independent. And when sort of I've been speaking to people in the studio today about this story, say, well, why does Warner even want to sell? And what's interesting here is Warner didn't want to sell. There was no decision made by Warner to say this business isn't going very well, or we want to do something else, we need to sell it, because it's got these distributed group of shareholders who can't really make decisions like that. The only reason we're discussing Warner being sold is because Paramount put in a bid earlier in the year, because the Ellisons are on this sort of buying spree when it comes to media. They put in a bid which had to be considered by the management of the company because it was their fiduciary duty to try and get the shareholders as much money as possible. So there was nothing wrong with this company. This company could have just sort of continued making films, managing CNN, whatever. Maybe you don't love CNN, but you know what I mean? This wasn't a company in distress, but it was just that you had these giant companies who said, actually, we want to buy you. And because it's the legal responsibility of the company to maximize shareholder value, they have no choice but to sort of agree to a takeover bid. And as I said, the management of Warner, so the current CEO and the board, they approved this sale to Netflix, but now the Ellisons and Paramount are saying, you should have actually accepted our bid. Now we're going to go public and tell the shareholders what they could have had, and they're going to try and get the shareholders to outvote the current board of directors. But it is crazy that this can just happen to a business which was just happily plodding along doing its business. It wasn't the case that someone has to buy Warner. It could just continue as an independent business, and we'd have less market concentration, more choice, less Trump allies owning news companies. It seems like one of those situations where the status quo is actually better than all the changes being suggested. So why will it be allowed to go ahead? Well, for much of the 20th century, this is exactly the kind of attempted acquisition which would have been blocked by the competition authorities. America used to have a very sort of proactive anti-monopoly enforcement agency, I suppose, in the state, but that's been weakened since the 1980s, as was explained brilliantly by the writer Cory Doctorow, writer of the book Institution, a term which Barry mentioned earlier. And it just so happens that Cory Doctorow spoke recently to Aaron Bastani in a brilliant interview we put out yesterday. And I'm just going to show you a short clip where he explains how anti-monopoly law has been eroded in America to the detriment of all of us.
The reason we don't have market competition anymore is not because of the great forces of history. It's not because of the iron laws of economics. It's because neoliberal economists from the Chicago School said that monopolies were efficient and demanded that governments stop enforcing anti-monopoly law. And they said if you encounter a monopoly in the wild, if Google has a 90% search market share, that must be because they made the best search engine. And wouldn't it be perverse to use public resources to shut down a company that has been so great that we all have chosen to use their products. And so 40 years ago, they demanded a halt to the enforcement of competition law. And over 40 years, there's been a continuous drawdown of it. And now we have monopolies in every sector. It's not just tech, although the internet is 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 4. But it's also sterile bags full of saline. It's semiconductors, it's intermodal and sea freight, it's professional wrestling, it's cheerleading, it's glass bottles and vitamin C. Wherever you look, there's 5 or fewer companies that are running it. And again, it's not a mystery where this came from. And the only way that you can make it a mystery is if you have the specific kind of brain injury that you can only get by doing an economics degree. And so you have these economists who said we should stop enforcing monopoly law, and who would then see these monopolies all around us, and who are like, well, how do you know it's our fault? Right? And it's like we used to not have a rat problem. We were putting down rat poison, and then these guys convinced us not to put down rat poison, and now rats are eating our faces off. And when we complain about it, they say, well, why are you looking at us? Maybe this is just the time of the rat.
Very, very entertaining guy. I recommend listening to that entire interview. I suppose sort of super summarized what changed when it came to monopoly enforcement is it used to be the case that the competition authorities would judge market concentration to be bad in and of itself because it gives these companies too much power, it undermines choice, et cetera, et cetera. They'll have too much market power to raise prices. What changed after the 1980s was that Chicago economists, so sort of people in the Milton Friedman school, said actually concentration has lots of benefits. So sort of going from 10 competitors to 3, it means you'll get economies of scale. And unless you can prove that they'll raise prices, you should let it go ahead. So that's why, Meta or Facebook was allowed to buy Instagram and WhatsApp to become Meta, because they said, well, the price of WhatsApp isn't going to increase. The price of Instagram isn't going to increase. So what's the harm? What it does mean is that now Mark Zuckerberg has so much power over the advertising industry that he can, do real damage to media companies, for example. You can't make money now if you're an online newspaper unless you're the New York Times, because all the ad revenue goes to Meta or it goes to Alphabet. So, big problem, and we seem to be continuing along that line. Actually, Joe Biden did have some sort of significant people who were very anti-monopoly in his administration, Lena Khan at the FTC. But I think Donald Trump is much more, let's say, a bit less principled with it. So he'll be against market concentration unless you're his friend, in which case he thinks it's absolutely brilliant.